Hey all, today I will be exploring the relationship between popular U.S. presidents Theodore Roosevelt and Franklin Roosevelt. I will start with Teddy, trace him back to his earliest known ancestor, then swing around to Franklin. So let's get started. Theodore Roosevelt Jr. lived from 1858 to 1919. He had 2 wives and 6 children, 4 sons and 2 daughters. His first wife, Alice Lee, died in childbirth. Teddy named his first daughter after her. He then had 5 children with Edith Kermit Carow, Theodore III, Kermit, Edith Carow Roosevelt, Archibald Bulloch Roosevelt, and Quentin Roosevelt. All got married and had children except Quentin, who died in World War I. Teddy's career included various important jobs, including New York City Police Commissioner, Governor of New York, 25th Vice President of the United States, and of course 26th President of the United States. As many know, he was elevated to president when his predecessor, William McKinley, was assassinated in 1901. Teddy himself was the second of 4 children born to Theodore Roosevelt Senior and Martha Bulloch. His younger brother, Elliott Bulloch Roosevelt, was the father of Eleanor Roosevelt, who became the wife of Franklin Roosevelt. Like his older brother, Elliott was a charismatic man. However, he did develop an alcohol problem and ultimately died by suicide in 1894, 2 years after the death of his wife, Anna Hall. Interestingly, Teddy walked Eleanor down the aisle because Elliott had died by the time of her wedding. So Theodore Senior lived from 1831 to 1878. He was a businessman and a philanthropist who founded the New York Orthopedic Hospital. He was very close to his son Teddy, who called him an ideal man and father. Theodore Senior did have several siblings. I've only included one on the chart, James Alfred Roosevelt, his oldest brother, because of a fun fact that will come into play very shortly. Theodore's parents were Cornelius Van Schack Roosevelt and Margaret Barnhill. Cornelius was a hardware and plate glass importer. He lived from 1794 to 1871. He had a younger brother named James John Roosevelt, who was a congressman. Cornelius's parents were Jacobus Roosevelt, aka James, and Mary Van Schack. Through his mother, Cornelius was actually a descendant of the prominent Schuyler family. Another famous member of this family was Elizabeth Schuyler, wife of Alexander Hamilton. Anyway, James Jacobus Roosevelt lived from 1759 to 1840. He started the hardware business that his son ultimately inherited. This ultimately became Roosevelt and Son. James created the company in 1797. In the mid-19th century, it became an investment banking firm. It was passed down through the years and ultimately ended up in controlled by Teddy's first cousin, William Emlyn Roosevelt. He was the son of James Alfred Roosevelt, who I previously mentioned. Anyway, the firm was separated into 3 different firms in the 1930s, one of which still exists today as Roosevelt and Cross in New York City. Pretty cool, I think, that they managed to keep this running for over 200 years. Granted, they were very rich and powerful, so it probably wasn't the hardest thing to do for them. Anyway, so James Jacobus's parents, so let me just click here and get to that, were Jacobus Roosevelt and Anachi Bogert. I'm sure I butchered that one. Sorry about that. Jacobus lived from 1724 to 1777. He was a shopkeeper. He was also a commander of a militia company in New York and was ultimately killed in battle in the American Revolution. Jacobus's parents were Johannes Roosevelt and Heil G. Slowertz, which again, another name that I'm sure I butchered, sorry. Johannes lived from 1689 to 1750. He is considered to be the founder of the Oyster Bay Roosevelt family. He was a linseed oil manufacturer by trade. Johannes's parents, Nicholas Roosevelt and Helge Jans Kunst, this couple are the mutual ancestors of both Teddy and Franklin Roosevelt. Nicholas was born Nicholas van Roosevelt in 1658 and was the first generation of Roosevelts born in the U.S. He was born in what was then known as New Amsterdam, situated at the far south of current-day Manhattan. Nicholas was a fur trader, bolter, and early political figure. He died in 1742. Now, going back even further, his parents, Klaes Martensen van Roosevelt and Janetje Samuels Thomas, were Dutch immigrants. They were from a small town in southwest Netherlands called Tholen. I have found some evidence for Klaes's parents, but I haven't been able to confirm them. So I'll leave that alone for now. I could delve into that a little further if there's enough interest. So let me know in the comment section below. Anyway, getting back to Nicholas Roosevelt, who was, again, the common ancestor of Teddy and Franklin Roosevelt and Klaes's son. He was the only male child of Klaes and Janetje to live to adulthood. Therefore, it seems that all Roosevelts currently in the U.S. descend from this man. Indeed, he had several children, including Johannes, as previously mentioned, and Jacobus Roosevelt. So this Jacobus Roosevelt was the founder of the Hyde Park Roosevelt family, which are Franklin Roosevelt's ancestors. He lived from 1692 to 1776. So the name Jacobus, it's going to get a little confusing because of how repetitious it is throughout this family. This was extremely common among most families of European origin well into the 20th century. So again, very common to hear this name, and we will be hearing it very often in the future, just to spice things up and make things a little more confusing. Anyway, Jacobus was married to Katharina Hardenbroek. Their son, Isaac Roosevelt, was an early prominent member of this branch. Isaac made a fortune in sugar refining and was a very early New York State senator from 1788 to 1792. He was a patriot during the American Revolution and served in the Committee of 100, which was the primary influence of the boycott of British goods, and was an elected leader in the New York Provincial Congress in 1775. Isaac Roosevelt married Cornelia Hoffman and had 10 children. The only one I've included here is another Jacobus, or James Roosevelt, who lived from 1760 to 1847. He inherited money through his father and also became a sugar refiner. He was also a banker and made an additional large fortune this way aside from his generous inheritance. James married Maria Eliza Walton, who was his first marriage out of 3, but this was the most prominent one, and the marriage that ultimately produced the ancestor of Franklin Roosevelt, who was Isaac Daniel Roosevelt, who lived from 1790 to 1863. He is, as I said, the grandfather of FDR. His house is in Hyde Park, New York. It still stands and is listed in the National Register of Historic Places, just in case you ever want to visit sometime for some reason. It's in Nassau County, New York. So Isaac married Mary Rebecca Aspinwall. So they were the parents of James Roosevelt, FDR's father. Mary came from the prominent Aspinwall family. So here's her father, John Aspinwall Jr., and her mother, Susan Howland, who was a direct descendant of John Howland, a passenger on the Mayflower. So FDR does have several connections to Mayflower passengers, but this is the simplest connection, so I've included it here. I could always do another video, if you guys would like, about other connections to Mayflower passengers, either through FDR or somebody else. Okay, so here's James Roosevelt, FDR's father. He went to law school at Harvard, worked in coal and transportation. He had two wives, Rebecca Bryan Howland and Sarah Ann Delano. James and Rebecca had one child, James Roosevelt Roosevelt. So his middle name here was Roosevelt. She died in 1879, and James remarried to Sarah Ann Delano. James and Sarah were the parents of FDR. So, as we know, FDR was the only four-term president. He was responsible for Social Security and welfare, presided over the country in both the Great Depression and World War II, among other things. He ultimately died in office early in his fourth term in 1945 from complications of polio. So, did a lot of stuff in office. Again, I don't think I need to tell anybody that, because that's very well known. As I previously mentioned, FDR married Anna Eleanor Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt's niece. They had a total of 6 children: Anna Eleanor Roosevelt, James Roosevelt, Franklin Delano Roosevelt Jr., who died in infancy, Elliott Roosevelt, a second Franklin Delano Roosevelt Jr., and John Aspinwall Roosevelt. So here's a comparison chart, starting with Claes van Rosenvelt. Then we see Nicholas, then the brothers Johannes and Jacobus, and then first cousins Jacobus and Isaac, then second cousins Jacobus and Jacobus. See, there's that name again, constantly repeating itself. And then third cousins Cornelius Van Schack and Isaac Daniel Roosevelt, followed by fourth cousins Theodore Senior and James Roosevelt, and finally presidents Teddy Roosevelt and Franklin, who were fifth cousins. So there you have it. This is how Teddy and Franklin are related. Feel free to comment with your thoughts and ideas below, as well as other video suggestions. I do read the comments, and I'm always looking for new videos and other ideas. So take care, and let me know what you think below.